Support for Flying Valiant Builds is brought to you by 1st and 64th Customs, Video Geek Productions, the Brian Smith YouTube channel, Matchbox Mark, Jonathan Vonesh, Wade Hendryx, and Donald Rachic. Please like, share, and subscribe. Alright, time for another... What? Insert? Okay. That's weird. Alright, let's see what we got up. Wait, I got pick, speed, handling. Alright, speed it is. Hey there folks, Chuck here, and I've got a very special build today. The good folks over at Diecast Heroes, which is a subsidiary of Superfly Auto, issued a challenge for their third issue of the magazine for us customizers to recreate some of our favorite video game vehicles or to create vehicles inspired by our favorite video games. I knew immediately which one I was going to do, and I knew that nobody else was going to do it because nobody else has ever remembered this video game. And it is called Cisco Heat. It is from 1990, and it was the first video game that I ever played where you could sit down in a side-by-side racer like you were sitting in a real car with the foot pedals and with a shifter, and I adored this game. I played it so often that there's even a picture of me in our 1992 yearbook playing the video game. And look, there I am. Fun fact, this little guy is Carolyn's younger brother. That's how long we've known each other. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the game, which is pretty much everyone, it was a rudimentary 3D style racer game where you inexplicably raced police cars through a simulation of San Francisco in some equally inexplicable race between other law enforcement agencies. In the side-by-side version, you could choose between the red car and the blue car. I liked the blue one because it was on the left-hand side, as all proper driving is done. And you could choose speed or handling. Speed being some kind of giant 1980s GM vehicle reminiscent of a Cadillac, and the handling version, which was very clearly a ripoff of a Nissan 300ZX. Being an avid fan of the Blues Brothers, I always went with speed, because this was the closest you could get to racing the Bluesmobile as you could get at the time. The artistry clearly depicts this as something very close to a Cadillac four-door. There aren't too many 80s Cadillac four-door castings out there, so this $2 super play-worn Dukes of Hazzard version of Ertl's Pontiac Bonneville seemed like the perfect candidate to get the job done. And seeing as it was only $2 and all the paint's pretty much gone anyway, we're not really losing that much. Alright, enough backstory. Let's get to the breakdown. As I said, the Diecast Heroes team needed us to build a car inspired by our favorite video game, in this case Cisco Heat. So we are going to recreate the Cisco Heat speed car. I wanted to 3D print some mirrors and a light bar for it, as well as some authentic graphics to mimic the artwork that would have been on the display side of the video game console. I definitely needed to restore the glass, as it was clearly in rough shape. That turned out to be quite the challenge. More on that in a minute. We needed to give the car some street grime, and as it's depicted in the artwork, I wanted to show some damage being done to the side of the vehicle, because as y'all know, rubbin' is racing. Ready? Punch that subscribe button. Let's boogie. As soon as I got the vehicle apart, I knew the windshield was where I needed to start. And hoo boy, did it need some help. First, this vehicle had been painted black at some point, so I used a dry erase marker to lift the paint carefully off of the glass without any harsh solvents damaging the windows further. There was already a crack that I didn't notice when I took it apart, but I decided that it would not be visible once everything was together, so best to just leave it be. I was hopeful I could polish out some of the yellow, but unfortunately that seemed very clearly to not be the case. Although it did get a lot smoother, it was still a very yellowed piece of glass. So this vehicle was clearly left out in the sun, probably in the yard for a few years. So that meant having to get creative. I was up against a deadline, so I didn't have much chance to do it the right way. and I'll link to those ways in the description below. But there is another way to do it if you happen to have access to UV light and hydrogen peroxide, which I did. Don't try this at home, kids. So I filled the bin with hydrogen peroxide, carefully placed the clear plastic inside, and let it soak under a UV light for 3 whole days. Ideally, you want stronger hydrogen peroxide than the stuff you can get over the counter at your local drugstore, but this is what I had, and it did the job fairly well. Once I got it in the pledge dip, you can see it is significantly clearer than it was before. Not perfect, but close enough for government work, and it was time to move on with the actual build. Before we could even start on the paint, I knew that my new light bar would need to have a solid roof to go on it, so I broke out the old Jim Silva Special, some JB Weld, and masked up the hole on the other side, and scraped some over the top, and it's really about as simple as that. Let it dry, and file with an emery board until smooth. I knew I wanted to do 3D printed side mirrors, but I decided to drill holes anyway, so I could have an extra pocket for the glue to sit in and get some extra bite to the glue when I put the mirrors on. So I drilled a 1mm hole. The back of this thing was really rough, so I filed it smooth and then roughed up the sides. I tried to make it look like there was a bunch of side wiping going on, so I made sure all of the dents and dings had a more horizontal shape to them. It took a few tries to get the right kind of light bar that I wanted. I ended up using an amalgamation of several different designs to create the correct replica for the light bar, and I super glued it in place. Followed by the side view mirrors, which I got from diecastparts.co.za, and I'll have a link to them in the description below. I decided, since there was going to be a lot of white on the vehicle, to actually start with a black primer. My logic being that the black would give the white a heavier look, and it worked out. Right up until the part where I decided to paint the blue section. And wow, did that blue turn out purple. Wash it all off and start again. This time around I went with a much lighter blue than I thought would work, and as you can see, it turned out almost perfect as far as the medium blue that was represented in the video game. I had then used some Tamiya masking for the fine details and some general masking tape for the rougher large areas to block off the areas for the white paint, and because it was already blue, I ended up with a nice cool white on top, which I was pretty happy with. I also sealed the interior with a black sealer before hitting it with a medium gray coat for that generic 80s cop interior. And yes, that is one of my 3D printed steering wheels. Thank you for asking. The interior I didn't do too much with, because even with the windows being polished to a mirror finish, there was still a lot of distortion. So I added some black Tamiya panel liner to draw attention to the ribbing in the upholstery, and I put a little on the dash as well, and then wiped most of it off with a cotton swab just to get a hint of a shadow. Here's where I made another mistake. I drifted from the source material and trusted my memory, and I thought for sure there was a blue line along the bottom of the car. There was not. So I went back in with the brush and carefully brushed in the white along the bottom. I knew there was going to be some streak grime down there, so I wasn't too worried about brush strokes showing. But now the dirty truth behind some of my builds. Sometimes you have to touch up with a brush, and that's okay. I recreated the decals as best I could from what few reference images I could find online. I had to make the star pretty much from scratch. The Jalico logo was pretty easy to find. I printed these out on my Ghost White toner printer. I do appreciate everyone that's been asking, but as for now, I have discontinued doing decal commissions just because my machine is too finicky and I don't have the time to respond to your requests in a timely manner at the moment. Those of you still waiting on commissions know what I'm talking about. Sorry about that. I'll get to them as soon as I can. I did think it was interesting to have a police livery that also had a rally look to it as well, so I had a lot of fun making these decals. The chassis was pretty simple on the underside, but I detailed it as best I could. I really like how the taillights turned out on this thing. It's just DSP silver with acrylic stoplight red brushed down inside of it and then cleaned up with my fingertip. I used some Vallejo metal medium for the backup lights and for the headlights, and the Stewart Simple Mirror paint for the bumpers, being careful to leave a little gap of blue between the grille and the actual bumper. Once I was certain everything was very dry, I went over it with the Tamiya black panel liner to draw out the shadows in the grille and around the headlights, as well as the taillights, which proved to be a bit trickier. I also did some Nuln oil wash along the bottom of the car. And yeah, I probably should have done the entire underside in black, but I'm kind of digging these body color chassis lately. The light bar and the mirrors held so much better because I glued them on before painting. Doing the details was a bit of a chore. The light bar is red paint with metal medium and blue paint with metal medium on either side, and of course Stuart's simple mirror paint for the mirrors and the chrome section of the light bar. And then I had to get in with a toothpick and try and get the feet painted black underneath. And as you can see, that was a huge mess. But thanks to a generous dosing of gloss varnish, it was pretty easy to clean up the mess afterward. And once I was sure the red and blue were very dry, I went over them with AK Interactive Wet Effects, which is an oil-based clear coat that's, as I've mentioned before, more like a syrup than a paint. And it creates really good puddles, but it also creates a really good glass illusion to add some depth to the light bars. If I had to do them over again, I think I would have done them in a darker tint, but I'm still pretty happy with how they turned out. And since I had the wet effects out already, might as well do the headlights, taillights, and other lenses as well. One of the benefits of the Vallejo gloss varnish is that because it's water-based, you can go over it with the Tamiya panel liner, and while it doesn't cling as well to the gloss finish as it would a satin or a matte finish, it does still flow relatively well and not reactivate the varnish. So it's pretty easy to lay on the panel liner to draw out all those different door gaps and fender gaps. Love that smooth capillary action. I was waiting on the panel liner to dry. I decided the light bars could use just a little more wet effects, so put an extra layer on there. And of course, my creative juices got things out of order yet again, and I forgot to check and see if my new wheels would fit. They did not, so it was time to make some custom axles and grind out a slightly wider area for that custom axle to fit. The wheels are Greenlight, and actually they're from one of their Jeep collections. I imagine these would have been the wheels that would have gone on a Commando or one of the more luxury Jeep vehicles. It had that right wheel cover with white wall tire look that I was going for. I did want to make it look like it lost a wheel cover in the race, so I found a 3D design Steely that I liked, did some slight modifications of it, and printed it to go in place of one of the wheel cover wheels. With the axles glued in place, it was time to start with the street grime weathering. This is this little dirt effect from MIG, and before I got too much farther, I needed to snap everything together. The vehicle in the picture had black plastic trim on the chrome bumper, which was pretty indicative of 1980s land yacht bumpers. So I very carefully roughed some in with tarnished black. I wasn't too thrilled with how that turned out, so I ended up going back over it with some gloss black later. Now it's time to add some rubbing damage. So I dry brushed over the areas with a fine tip brush using silver, trying very hard not to go overboard with the scraping. I then added a little paint trading from our rivals in the red vehicle. Here's me replacing that gray with the gloss black. It turned out a lot better. And adding a little black grime in there. I didn't do too much with the wheels and tires. I just used some panel liner on them. There wasn't really a place for the front license plate, so instead of using the decal as a water slide, I trimmed it out and just glued it to the front bumper using the backing as a license plate frame. So that needed a little touch up with a Sharpie. I also added a bit of shadow underneath using some city dirt pigment from AK Interactive, and went around the underside of the vehicle as well, making it look like some street grime had gotten kicked up in there. This is the Tamiya weathering powders, using a little bit of desert sand and mud to brown up the mix underneath the car. I also added some dust to the windshield, and with a fine tip brush and the Make Rain marks, painted in a little ghosting from where the windshield wipers would have stopped and left filth on the vehicle as it was careening through the streets of San Francisco. In the video game, mist and water are very much a factor, so I wanted to make sure there were some wet effects on the vehicle. I brought a little bit of dust up on the side and then rubbed most of it off just to keep it really subtle. And then it was time for the decal and the number. And hey, this is big build number 50. How about that? If you've made it this far, make sure to tell me congrats on 50 builds in the comments. All right, that's that. Let's take one more look at what we started from. This used and very much abused Ertl Pontiac Bonneville from the Dukes of Hazzard playset. And let's whip it through the nostalgia machine. There we go. A proper looking 80s ground pounder, ready to take on the mean streets of San Francisco in some strange form of law enforcement racing. It was really special to bring this thing to life, and I really appreciate the folks at Diecast Heroes for giving me the challenge and the opportunity to do this. As a kid, I always wanted to have a toy version of the car from that video game, and had completely forgotten about that until they issued the challenge, so it was really cool to wave back through the years and tell little me that one day I will have one. I just have to make it myself. But I don't quite make them myself. There's a lot of people that help me get to where I am. On top of my family and my friends who have helped me so far, there are the amazing patrons that support this channel. You saw the Bandit level patrons at the beginning of the video, but I've got a lot more that help keep the lights on here. So I also want to thank my Rockford level patrons: Mid-Island Custom Diecast, Maple Leaf Customs, Double B's Customs, Mr. Zanzibar 91, Gary Tasker, and Aunt Tracy. It's also my Douglas level patrons: the Good Bad Better Podcast, Jordan Kleinhenn, the Chris Crass channel, the Jim Silva channel, and Kamikaze Customs. Thank you all so much for helping me complete 50 builds. I cannot believe that I've done that many so far. And if you're looking back through my channel and going, I don't see 50 builds here, that's because I'm going a little out of order. I'm trying to release as many of these as I can with my new schedule and with my new editing setup. And there's a lot more to come. So if you haven't punched the subscribe button yet, be sure to do that, because I got a lot more fun stuff to share, and I'd love to have you join me. If you want to support the channel, the best way you can do it is by watching these videos, subscribing, sharing with your friends. You can also join me on Patreon over at flyingvaliant.com, or you can hit one of those buttons down below that will allow you to join the Flying Valiant community here on YouTube and help support the channel further. Still getting all that set up, but it should be functioning now. Let me know if it isn't. Oh, and before we go, I wanted to recommend another builder. This is Doc300ZX. He has far too few followers, in my opinion, for the talent that he has. Just check out this old blue wrecker he built. He designed and 3D printed that entire back end himself. He's incredibly talented, and I would love to see his channel get some more love. So be sure to pop on by, turn his subscribe button gray, and tell him I sent ya. Well, I got a lot more videos to edit, so better wrap this one up. As always, I want to thank you for coming along with me for the ride. So until next time, stay fresh, cheese bags.